Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Venice. This is day 2 of Climate How to Engage Society and Deploy Decarbonization. It's a 2-day symposium organized by Alcantara, the Venice International University, as well as the Connect for Climate program of the World Bank. And we're really looking into how to accelerate the transition to a decarbonized and a resilient future. Yesterday we had a series of inspiring presentations that took us through the state of trends, where we are today, laying out the urgency to transition away from a fossil fuel-based economy to one that is renewable, low carbon, and in line with the climate goals of achieving a warming world well below 2 degrees, if not at 1.5 degrees. We also heard that the private sector is stepping up, that it looks like it's really beneficial to employ a sustainability strategy to go in line with the climate science. We also heard that the financing and the investments are stepping up and are creating the momentum to accelerate this transition. And finally, we heard that society is getting engaged. Young people around the world are demanding action. Policymakers need to step up and need to create the enabling space to really help facilitate the private sector and civil society to get engaged in this transition of our lifetime. Because as we also heard, climate change is our generation's challenge. It is only suiting that we're here in Venice, where we're seeing the impacts of rising sea levels that are literally eroding away on society's history, as you can see in the beautiful city behind us. So today we're going to dig deeper. We're going to go into the discussions of how do we accelerate the deployment of decarbonization? How do we engage society? But before we go there, I'd like to welcome Ralf Pfitzner. Ralf is a vice president and global head of sustainability at Volkswagen, and he's going to give us a bit of an introduction to their decarbonization approach for the Volkswagen Group. So thank you and welcome to the stage, Ralf.
So thank you very much, Max, for the nice introduction, for the kind introduction. Good morning to every one of you. I'm really happy to be here for the first time at this conference, and I had the opportunity to join last night's dinner, and we had exciting conversations at our table, so I'm very much looking forward to the day today. I'm going to talk for the next 20 minutes, roughly, about transformation, because the automotive industry is, I would say, at the beginning of a huge transformation driven by electrification, driven by climate change, and then also in the future downwards by autonomous driving. So it's a multiple transformation of the entire industry which is about. Before I get into my presentation, let me quickly ask you, who of you owns a car? Just raise your hands, please. Okay, and that's probably less than average in society. Who of you uses a car? Okay, that's the majority, clearly. Who of you has ever driven a hybrid car? Well, that's above average, I would say. Who owns an electric vehicle? Okay, that's probably the Norwegians and a couple of others. I hope in some years from now, when asking the last question, I want to see, let's say, for all who own a car, also raise their hands that they're driving an electric vehicle, because this is what the transformation is about, electrification. So, starting or kicking this off with, let's say, a very simple sentence when talking about the transport sector in our industry, the headline could also be, we are part of the problem, or we are part of the challenge. Transport sector currently accounts for globally roughly 14% of global emissions, and unfortunately, due to its success, it's the only sector in the European Union which has increasing carbon emissions compared to other industries. There's been a lot happening in industry, it's happening a lot in energy, but the transport sector, also due to globalization, economic growth, increasing customer demand, has faced slightly increasing emissions since 1990. So that's the challenge we are talking about. The next one is, we are part of the challenge, or we are part of the problem, but we think we are also part of the solution, since mobility / individual mobility is somewhat a basic need that people want to have fulfilled, and our task is to help them fulfilling it in the most sustainable manner. So decarbonization in terms of priorities in our sustainability program is the first and foremost task, because we believe, first thing is, we have a significant influence. If you turn those global 14% of emissions and calculate the impact and the market share of Volkswagen on the passenger car side, as well as on the truck side, we are talking about roughly 1% of global emissions that happen over the life cycle of our vehicles. So we have a significant influence, and thus we also have a significant responsibility in climate change mitigation. We also see, and not only the diesel crisis has been a wake-up call and a trigger point for change, we're seeing rising stakeholder expectations in terms of public sector companies acting on climate change mitigation. And last but not least, we truly believe, and this is also my let's say, personal belief and the reason why I have taken over also this job as head of sustainability in the group, I believe decarbonization in the long term is a business opportunity. One thing is that in line with decarbonization, there's potential to raise efficiency across the entire value chain, and reducing emissions always or very often comes along with a positive business case. The other thing is really in the long term, managing risks and opportunities and getting acceptance by society for the products we offer is an essential for future success of the company. Then let's move on, and this is probably one of the things that our head of product strategy recently announced and communicated for the first time in December at an event. If we're taking the Paris Agreement seriously, the transport sector, at least for the passenger cars, has, well, not fully decarbonized, but in a majority, has to be decarbonized by 2050. And if we take that into account and say, well, the average lifetime of a car is roughly 10 years, or it's 200 to 200 up to 250,000 kilometers. A decarbonized transport sector in the existing fleet by 2050 means somewhat having no new ICE vehicles after 2040, because you have this 10 years fleet renewable in here. So that would mean end of production for ICEs. It will be differentiated by regions globally, for clear, but on the major markets, this has to happen, otherwise we can't decarbonize the transport sector. And then you can do some backwards calculations in terms of products, models, and also so-called platforms on which the different models are built. And then the start of production of the last generation of an ICE gets nearer. And interestingly, last week I had a nice conversation with the chairperson of Greenpeace in Germany, and the principal logic behind, there is no disagreement, even with Greenpeace. The only, let's say, slight disagreement is how fast can this ramp up of EVs happen and the decrease of the CO2 emissions towards a zero net emission transport system. So that's the challenge we are facing, and those dates are let me go back one more. Okay, Those dates are getting closer. And interestingly also, what I heard from the colleagues who do the product planning, when they started a couple of years ago, you have to know that developing a new model generation, a new platform in the automotive industries takes 5 to 7 years. So the planning for these things happened a while ago, and now when doing the forecast in terms of demand of electric vehicles, every single year the forecast is getting higher, and let's say last year's planning numbers for 2021 in the current planning round are already exceeded. So we see a faster uptake in demand, what we expect, than 1 or 2 years before. So that's the very long-term view. The other thing is we have to look closer, where do the carbon emissions come from? And this is a picture of the entire life cycle. So as of today, and these are figures for an average Volkswagen Group car over the life cycle. So it's a mix of all passengers and light commercial vehicles. It's Porsche, it's Audi, it's Volkswagen, it's Skoda, it's Seat. So it's a mix across all models. Life cycle emissions as of 2015 in total account for roughly 44 tons over the entire life cycle. And what you clearly see here, the use phase, well, I think no surprise for all of you, is dominating with 2/3 of it. This is the tailpipe emissions of a mix dominated today by ICEs, the combustion engines. You also have the upstream supply chain from the oil and gas industry, which has the same importance than all the materials from the rest of the supply chain, from mining to our factory doors. The manufacturing in-house itself has a relatively low importance if you take the life cycle into account. We're tackling energy efficiency, moving towards renewable energy, and there is still potential, but the important things are happening in the use phase with the upstream fuel chain and also with our suppliers. If we turn the Paris Agreement, and we're currently doing the math also in terms of working on our decarbonization plan, if we're taking the Paris Agreement, the below 2 degrees goal, and then move it into a sector budget for the transport sector, and then take our share in the sector, the Paris Agreement, the 2 degrees pathway, in turn would mean roughly a 30% reduction over the entire life cycle by 2025. And this is the challenge which is out there for us. We have done the math, and we are now working on a plan and decisions. Can we make it, and then how can we make that? So that's what's out there for us right now. Talking about life cycle and comparisons, there is a lot of myth and truth out there on mobility. And we have got a number of experts in-house who are doing life cycle assessments since a long time. And here are the results of a comparison of a Golf class vehicle as of today on their life cycle CO2 emissions. And what you can see here, that as of today, a battery electric vehicle is already better than a petrol car and also a bit better than a diesel car. So that's the current mix in the EU. If you take the country-specific mix of EU countries, the BEV, I think as of today, is already better in 24 out of 28 EU countries. So some people say, well, if you drive an electric car in Europe, you have still a lot of coal in the system, this is worse. No, for this type of car, this is not the case. It is already better as of today. We will see changes because the current generation of battery electric vehicles has relatively small batteries, and thus also a relatively small mileage. The next generation of cars will have higher capacity of the batteries, thus longer mileage, thus also a bigger impact here in the upstream materials CO2 footprint. But we're working again on reducing that, for example, by asking our battery cell manufacturers to use green electricity and so on. So that's the situation as of today. These numbers will soon be published also in a study, because this is one of the first really peer-reviewed life cycle assessments, externally validated, in order to bring in some proven facts into the discussion, because there's so many studies out there. One says, well, e-cars are a hoax because the carbon emissions from manufacturing batteries are way too high and it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't make sense because of the grid mix. Well, this is proven and validated facts, so I hope this will also serve as helpful in the entire discussion on e-mobility. Good. Since we know that e-mobility as of today is already a good choice, here's some numbers which decisions have already been made within Volkswagen. And if we can, I think, easily argue that an e-Golf's availability is difficult as of today. The mileages of current e-cars are limited. But here's the proof point that the company has understood the call for the new e-mobility, because this is not something theoretical. This is real investments which have been decided on and are already being made. The 30 billion euros investments in e-mobility are going to happen within the next 5 years. So that's a big bet, also to say, on e-mobility, and we believe that Volkswagen is capable with that to bring e-mobility really to the people. So not only as a niche for net high worth individuals, but really bringing it to the mass market. Until 2025, there will be roughly 50 new full electric models and hybrid models, and the lower number here is that the platform, so-called MEB, Modular Electric Toolkit platform, will be capable on that base to have roughly 15 million cars produced. So there is a capacity on this platform which will, over years, be able to bring 15 million cars on the market. So that's our massive investment in e-mobility right now. And I'd like to continue with one example, and this is about the very first electric car from the new generation, so the so-called Volkswagen brand ID Neo. And here, well, there is a vision behind on CO2 neutral e-mobility in the future, and some objectives which we are now pursuing. For that car, we intend to have a CO2 neutral production, including the supply chain, and let's say tailpipe emissions will be zero. So the vision or the idea, and I'm going to explore a bit more on this in a minute, is to hand it over to the retail customer as a, let's say, carbon neutral car. To be honest, this is not a net zero, because there will be emissions in the supply chain which we can't reduce. So there will be also some compensation carbon credits or offsetting associated with that. The other part then is in the hand of the customer. There will be offerings for the customers, but we can force our customers to basically carbon neutrally drive the cars in the use phase. So what we are doing is investing in a fast charging network, and what we are also doing, and I have another slide on that, offering home charging solutions. But this is, at the end of the day, the customer's choice. In an ideal world, we would then have CO2 neutrality over the entire life cycle. And what's going to happen with this car? We are right now converting the Zwickau, it's in Saxony, plant to a full electric manufacturing plant. And this plant already has green energy. There had been a number of efficiency measures, energy efficiency measures being done there. And what is also contracted in the supply chain, that we asked our suppliers of the batteries, of cells, to use green electricity for their manufacturing, because it's a significant impact the battery manufacturing has over the entire life cycle. And then, when all the things are done in terms of avoiding and reducing emissions, the remaining emissions have to be compensated or will be compensated by credible forest reforestation and forest protection projects. So that's the approach the colleagues are moving forward on with this ID model. To summarize this, as mentioned before, we are taking care of the production phase. There will be unavoidable emissions, and happy to discuss this later on in a few minutes. There are pros and cons about compensation projects, offsetting, but we believe it's better than doing nothing. And there's also the fact, whenever we can, we are going to reduce emissions, but we can't do everything from tier 1 to tier, 4, 5, 6 suppliers right now. And the other one is customers have to make their choices in terms of charging at home. So that, again, was, let's say, still only a car. When talking about sustainable mobility, it's not only about cars, it's about an entire ecosystem. And I want to conclude basically with this slide summarizing that on the one hand, yes, we are a car manufacturer. And I see also my colleague Hermann Pengg from Audi sitting here. Audi offers also brilliant cars. But we are thinking in ecosystems. I don't know if you mentioned, Hermann, yesterday, alternative fuels and all these things which are going to happen. So more and more, with the transformation of the transport sector, we have to think in ecosystems. And one of the first and foremost important things is real sustainable e-mobility works only if we put emphasis on the energy systems transformation towards renewable energies. And our CEO, in a couple of public statements, he mentioned in the last weeks and months, it doesn't make sense to power e-cars with lignite, brown coal, hard coal. We have also to phase out coal in the system in order to have the most sustainable solutions. Footnote, also because reducing carbon emissions in the energy system comes at a much lower cost than reducing carbon emissions of an ICE. So that's the CO2 avoidance costs in the energy system are probably the most attractive ones compared to adding more technologies, lightweight building in the car. And this is not about excusing our industry and saying we don't need to do anything, but it's also a matter of prioritization. Where do we get, in terms of CO2, the best bang for the buck? So energy transformation is very important. Some of you might know that Volkswagen also owns power plants, and this is one in Wolfsburg, the biggest one, which is still, let's say, old technology because it is still coal-fired. But there has been a decision made last year to convert it into a highly efficient combined cycle gas-fired power plant. So once this is fully effective with 2 power plant blocks by 2022 or latest 2023, we are going to save 1.5 million tons of CO2 only from this single power plant, which is roughly equivalent for 800,000 cars. This is my last slide, so happy to finalize. Second one, we are a car maker, so we are working on emission reductions of the traditional engines, offering also alternative drivetrains and so forth. mentioned before, e-mobility only works with the charging infrastructure. So one thing is that together with other OEMs, we founded this Ionity fast charging network for European motorways. We are going to install their capacities along all the big motorways in Europe that people can use it for fast charging. Just a few weeks ago, Volkswagen launched the so-called ELI, green electricity provider for e-mobility for the Volkswagen brand. And last but not least, and then I come to the conclusion, mobility services is somewhat still in its infancy, to be honest, but we are also working on car sharing models. We are going to introduce in a few weeks from now an all-electric car sharing Volkswagen WeShare in Berlin with a significant amount of cars. And we have those Moja electric shuttles right now working in Hanover and Hamburg, and other cities are going to be targeted with this electric ride-hailing service. So thank you. Happy to get a few questions if we have time enough.
Yeah, a few quick questions, please.
And you are mentioning that you are getting carbon neutrality in the production phase by a process of compensation, which is obviously has a plus and minus, but for sure it's much better than doing nothing. We do the same. And we would like to know from when are you applying this process of compensation, and how do you compensate? How do you compensate? Is the process certified? In which way do you compensate your emission, the remaining part of emission that you cannot eliminate at the present level of available technologies?
Yeah, thank you. So there's been a public statement from those who own this car model that this ID Neo model, it's now for the first production in Europe for this specific model. The entire supply chain from cradle to gate will be reduced and then compensated. So it's a certain amount of certificates behind it. It's going to be done by, well, let's say purchasing carbon credits from RED+, Gold Standard projects on reforestation in tropical areas and forest protection. So we apply the highest standards which are out there. Also, you know, the Gold Standard has been co-developed with WWF, and we are supporting, as of today, then some existing projects which offer credits. The idea is also to move into the space that we co-develop own projects with project developers.
Great, thank you. And we've got one more question, and then we'll move on to the...
Yeah, so thank you for a great presentation. I can assure you that in Norway we are really looking forward to this happening. Just a quick question about kind of cargo trucks, buses. So just get your reflection on how electrification, you know, will affect that sector as well.
It certainly does. It might take another 20 minutes to explore it in full detail, because I've been thrilled by those things I've seen when visiting Scania in Stockholm and also talking to my MAN colleagues. So in a nutshell, what happens in the heavy haul transport sector? Electrification is one opportunity with electrifying roads. So let's say overhead cables for trucks along the motorways. Some pilots are run in Sweden. The next pilot is right now built up in Germany and in the country of Hesse. So that's a very interesting one for the longer distance heavy haul transport. There's alternative fuels, by certain types of biofuels. There is also a hybridization happening in the trucks. And what I heard from my colleagues, that the electrification, although immediately you would think, well, a 40-ton truck has to carry, I don't know, 10 tons of battery. Does it make sense, yes or no? The immediate thought is, well, probably it doesn't make sense, but what I hear from the colleagues, that with the technology development in terms of increasing density of power storage in the batteries, there will be much sooner than initially expected also potential for full electric trucks.
Fantastic.
That in a nutshell.
And I think Andrea can help himself with one more quick question.
Not for me, if there is any other question.
If there's any other question, but we can also explore it further in the discussions. And with that, thank you very much, Ralf. That was a really inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
And that truly was another example of how the private sector is embracing the transformation and accelerating its transition to a more sustainable future, to one that is embracing sustainable mobility, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and all the basic ingredients to build a low-carbon, resilient future. And with that, I'd like to welcome Gabrielle Walker, who was the climate editor for Nature, and she's a climate and energy strategist, and you're going to be taking us through the rest of the program today to really dive deeply into the climate how, so that we can come out with a bit of a resolution of how to take this forward and engage society and deploy decarbonization. So over to you, to Gabriella.
Thank you very much, Max. So, in my opinion, that was a brilliant way to start what we're actually going to try and do today. Climate how? I just wanted to mention, I told a few people this last night, I've been in the climate change game for quite a long time, for more than 25 years, starting off in science, then media, then politics, and now all my work is in the private sector. And in all of that time, I've had a lot of conversations, I've given a lot of speeches about climate change, I've tried to make change happen. I've given people facts and thought that was going to be enough. You know what, it really isn't. And then once about 5 or 6 years ago, I was giving a talk about climate change and what we need to do about it. So not just the problem, but also the solutions, right? Someone puts his hand up at the end and says, if it was as bad as you say, someone would be doing something. If it was as bad as you say, someone would be doing something. And I've been thinking about that almost every day since, because someone needs to be doing something, and what we're doing at the moment is not enough. So I wanted to quote from you. I was really struck by this. You've all heard this, but I wanted it to be ringing in the room as we spend our day today. And that's young Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who was speaking at Davos just a couple of weeks ago. Remember what she said? She talked about 3 things. She said, I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. So she talked about fear. She said, we owe it to the young people to give them hope. So she talked about hope. And then here's the last one, and this is a comment, this is a phrase, a sentence that I would really like to hold and hang in this room and be thinking about all the way through today. She said, I want you to act as if the house was on fire, because it is. Because it is. So I've been getting increasingly impatient over the last 25 years, and I suspect many people in this room have as well. Enough with the talk. What are we going to do? And so my final comment this morning, before I introduce the panel and explain what we're going to do. Greta Thunberg talked about fear, and she talked about hope. One thing that I have learned in this game is if you frighten people, you close them down. If you inspire and energize and engage people, you open them up. And if we open up human creativity, it is the most powerful force on earth. So that is what we're here to do today. So what I just heard Ralf said, and I scribbled it down very quickly, and this is why I think it was such a brilliant start. He said, the first steps towards a CO2 neutral society have been taken. The first steps have been taken. Now, what are the next steps? Now, the people in this room, I know all of you in this room, we are already engaged in this fight. We already know that the house is on fire, and we're already trying to do something about it. The question is, what can we do to engage the other people who need to be acting? So yesterday and this morning was first about setting the scene, giving information, showing what's actually out there in the world. What we're going to do now, today, is we have 3 different panels, and each of those panels is going to focus on what we can actually do to engage the people that we need to engage. The first panel will be about policymakers, the second panel will focus on finance and corporate, and the third panel on citizens. That's how we're going to take it through today. It's going to be a conversation. There's not going to be any more, someone should do something. This is about what we do to engage the people who need to do what they do to make the change happen fast enough that we can put out this fire. So if you're game, we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to try and nail down our brilliant panelists to see what we can come up with and ask you about it too. And at the end of the day, my mission, which I did choose to accept, is I will have 20 minutes to summarize it all and set out the program for what we need to do next. So wish me luck, and let's have the first lot of panelists, please. So what I'm going to do now is, you've heard everybody here. I'm going to introduce them very briefly in turn, just to remind you who they are and what they'll be talking about. Each of them is going to tell us one barrier to acting in engaging policymakers in this effort. And then we're going to try and talk about what we do about those barriers. So we start off with Giovanna Melandri. She spoke about the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment yesterday, former Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport of the Italian Republic. Giovanna, tell us, what's your barrier?
Well,
Are we going? If you just, it's on there. Just speak. Yeah. Just speak. Sorry.
yeah, I speak.
No, with the microphone.
Okay, yes. If we're looking at what makes it difficult for the political scene to raise actions and to create actions boldly, I think we should look at what are the drivers of someone who's sitting in government. And yes, I do agree with what you just said. Fear, hope, the house is on fire, we all know that. But there is a very deep psychological removal scheme. I'm in this area since 25 years. I've gone through all those feelings, impatience, fear, hope, also depression. I mean, when you're working on these issues for years and years and you don't see things happening, you get depressed. So why are politicians widely, I mean, this is not a generic, but why are they removing? Why is there this? And I think you have to see where they get their inspiration from. And I think it's 4 factors. First, okay, a drive for a political responsibility should be, well, let's say a moral leadership. Moral, cultural, ideological it was once. Now it's rather moral leadership. Where does the moral leadership come from on these issues today? Unfortunately, it does not come from the political scene, very widely so. It comes more yesterday, the Pope was, okay, so we need moral leaderships. Second, politicians react to their electorates and to their stakeholders. So I think we have to face the fact that the environmental movement all over the world, the Green Party sort of solution, stronger in some countries, less stronger in other countries, is not the solution. It's not enough. We need to embed this issue throughout all the political schemes and arena, second. Third, the economic turnout. I mean, yesterday we talked a lot about how much, and the very inspiring presentation this morning proves this. If there is a pool of money, pool of entrepreneurs that are leading, so this is my final statement. I think the leadership will not come from the political arena. And I mean, I personally was in the political arena for many years. I had important responsibilities in government, and now I'm working with the private sector because I do firmly and very deeply believe that the leadership is coming from here. And that leadership can be sort of passed on to the political arena.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's
Thank
given
you.
us a lot of meat to get involved with. So next, Connie Hedegaard, of course, chairman of the KR Foundation, of course, also former EU commissioner. You've been there at the cutting edge of how policy is made. So what do you think it's going to take, or what's the barrier stopping?
First, I agree very much with what you said about embedding this in all sorts of policy areas. But just one comment. Be careful, I think, not to say this is not for the policymakers. Because if it was so simple that business would do it themselves, why do we have a problem? I know this is a too simplistic way, but still, we need all sectors and all sort of ways of life to be part of this. And if I should mention just one next step that really needs to be done in order for having it embedded in all policy areas and in industry, and sending the right signal to us as citizens and consumers, then it is the pricing thing. To get a consistent way of pricing waste, overconsumption, resource waste, energy inefficiency, pollution. I mean, really to get the pricing right. And one way to do that is to change the way we tax things and the way we, as we said some years ago, tax more what you burn, not what you earn. But I mean, really to look more at the way we use resources. And it requires a total rethink, but I just think in the model we have chosen for our societies, the price signal is really crucial. And then you would ask, who then should do what? How do we do that? And I think that there is a very, very good chance right now, thank you, for a lot of, if business and if business representatives really started to demand this and demand it loud and clear and publicly and say this is one of the structural changes that we really understand that the policymakers have to do. I think that we are there where that could be a push that could change the thinking. All the big economic institutions, the OECD, the World Bank, the IEA, the IMF, they are all saying this, but still it's not trickling down to finance ministries. And there I think the component that is lacking is a stronger call from the strong business community. So that is something that could be done and that could really change things.
Thank you. And I think how to get to finance ministers, especially when they tend to be so siloed, is going to be a very key question. So another great and slightly daunting barrier there. So next, of course, Hermann Pengg, head of project management e-fuels at Audi. We heard him yesterday with his fantastic drawings about how we get from the problem to the modelling to the solution. What do you think is stopping us from getting effective policy engagement?
Yeah, I think as we are now in the policy sector in our first round, so I'll focus. There's a lot of things to say about awareness. I think, which would be in the beginning of the chain from problem to solution. But let's focus on policy and legislation. So I think one main problem is, if I look at the transport sector. We heard the speech of Ralf Pfitzner, and Volkswagen is going in a very good direction towards sustainability. But a lot of it is not triggered by legislation, in fact. So if you look at the legislation in transport sector, it just looks at what comes out of the exhaust pipe, of the tailpipe of the car. There is no legislation that enforces companies to use sustainable materials. This is all, they do it because they want to do it or because they want to make a marketing effect or whatever, but they're not doing because they're forced to do it. What if there was a law that included the life cycle analysis that we saw before into the law, so that all cars need to be made using renewable materials. Batteries need to be produced in green factories, And electric cars need to be charged with green electricity. And combustion engine cars need to drive with renewable fuels. This is a big pull on mineral oil companies, of course, because suddenly they would have to produce much more renewable fuels because customers would demand it and because car manufacturers would have to build the cars like this. So you see, if we included the cradle-to-grave life cycle analysis in legislation in the EU, or at least a well-to-wheel approach, which would be the first step towards the sustainability, then this would have a great effect on sustainability in the transport sector.
Brilliant, thank you. So life cycle analysis, I think that trying to get that involved in more legislation doesn't just apply to the transport sector. It applies to everything. So agriculture, energy, everything. And let's see if we can get a chance to talk about how we might be able to make that happen. We're getting quite an impressive list, but also a long list here. Alexander Voigt. Of course, we heard him talking yesterday about LUMENION, and what's your barrier?
You know, I think if the house is on fire, which it is, I think we have to learn how to stop the fire, and I think we haven't reached this point yet. So I think the right approach would be to get politicians and regulators to leave some experimental regions simply their hands off and give space to creativity, to have new systems where agriculture could link up with renewable energy production, with the production of fibers for the fashion industry, and really to have approaches to systematic change, which is needed to bring the CO2 emissions down to where we want. I don't think that we have reached the point where we exactly know how to fix the whole society, but if we have some like seed crystals in chemistry, you know, we have some parts in the different regions of the world, because it's also a cultural problem to take the people with you from their heritage, from their cultural background into the new future. And it is not the same recipe for southern Italy as it is for Venice. It's not the same recipe for Bavaria like it is for Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Germany. So the people have to start an experimental trip into the future. And I think this is only working if you put artists, architects, creative people, engineers together in experimental spaces. As I told yesterday, like it happened 100 years ago with the Bauhaus, which was the invention of what we call modern architecture. And I think we have to build teams, a lot of teams across the world in different cultures with that task. And then we have to monitor the learning curve that they are doing. We should give them the goal to reach in their region at this decarbonization level that we need. We should monitor what they do. We should look at them as a living laboratory, and then afterwards look what are the right regulations for all to apply on. You know, we have to get the 5% which are able to move, learn from them, and then copy to the rest of the 95% which is not able to move. I mean, they are good followers, but they will never get the thing done from an entrepreneurial or a pioneering perspective.
What an interesting idea, isn't it? And I think, I was just thinking about Singapore. I remember the government of Singapore not exactly doing that, but at least putting out tenders for experimentation, for example, with the desalination. Who can come up with the best solution? And you get to play, you get to try things, but then when you've got the best solution, you can commission it, right?
And it's also, if you have this approach, I mean, all the companies like Volkswagen, like they can offer their products to be part of the solution. It's not keeping the big multinationals out of the solution, but they also need markets to test about how the new products will fit in the new environment. Because, I mean, if you only ask the marketing people to give you answers to that, I mean, nothing will be the result.
Sure, and I think one of the things I really like about that is it's actually, I suspect you started off by saying, let's sort of get policy and regulation out of the way so people can play, but you can actually use policy and regulation to make that space. I don't think it should be so passive as to say we can get out of it. You can actually set a space and say, here are the rules, now you can go. And the other thing I like about it is that from my long experience of working with politicians, that's cool. If you get artists and creatives and you can show what you're doing and you can be a hero, that's actually cool.
And also the young generation. I mean, all the people that we have now on the streets, I mean, there is the creative potential to create the solution.
Yeah.
I think it's much more there, and in you know, we had now the young, when I was talking to the CEO of RWE, and he said, yes, but where should I find the people who are able to do the change process in my company? I said, go to the Hambacher Forest and pick them from the trees, because they are sitting there.
Okay, thanks. We're going to come back to all of these, and I think what I'm liking about it is that they're building. That's partly an answer to some of the things that you raised at the beginning. So this is looking good. So Gustav Martinsson, Professor of Financial Economics. Yesterday you were focusing quite a lot on finding structural solutions for redirecting capital flow. What do you think is the barrier for getting policymakers really engaged behind this?
Well, I'm going to think rather broadly. I'm not a policymaker myself. I want to mention two things. One thing that I mentioned yesterday, that we talk a lot about carbon pricing, and we talk about the kind of the notion that it's hard to implement a global carbon tax. And ideally, we think we want to raise the price on fossil fuels, and we want to kind of help out and lower the cost of renewables. But effectively, what we are doing today is we're actually subsidizing fossil fuel at a massive scale, which I can't see anything other than a barrier here. That being said, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm well aware of the fact that there are political issues why we are in this situation. I would like to mention one barrier that's closer to me that I think is just in my expertise and more as an educator, as a teacher in a business school. That, I mean, I teach finance, I teach economics, I have the textbooks I have, and it's very hard for me to meet the demand of, I mean, my students are upper half, born in the 90s, the upper half like 95 and upwards, and they just, why aren't you teaching me more about this? And it's not in the textbooks. And it's a barrier. This is the curriculum, this is the, obviously there are some in the universities, they have like centralized kind of sustainability departments, but I mean, it has to go beyond just adding on sustainability at the end of a finance course. Sure. And that is a big barrier.
Sure. So in this panel, we're focusing on policy, although that's going to come in, I suspect, later when we're talking more about citizens. But the how we train our business people and how we train our politicians, I think, is actually quite a significant part of this. One of the reasons that China is taking such a leadership role in this area compared to many Western governments is that it's a government of technocrats, right? So they're already educated to understand the science behind this. So then one question here would be, I've had it suggested, one NGO said he would like the funding to go and help educate some of the politicians in the UK around different solutions in the energy transition space, all of them. Just bring interesting people in to talk to them. There isn't anyone funding that, there isn't anyone doing it. Could that be a potential solution?
Sure, I think so. It could be.
So not just educating the students, but educating the policymakers.
Yeah, but I think educating the students, right? I mean, they are en masse. I mean, they are. I mean, I have 300 people that are. I mean, they're 25 years old, and they're going to go out. If I can just, I mean, the bang for the buck. I mean, essentially, I would, if I got a little bit more resources to just kind of update examples, and I mean, it obviously is a lot of work. I've partnered up a little bit with Arabesque of kind of helping and trying to kind of reach them, but still, it is effort and time, and that's not really. Sure. Something that's there currently, but sure. I think it's urgent.
One particular model that I've encountered is the Grantham School in yes. Imperial, who are deliberately placing people from the Grantham School studying climate change into the business school, into the finance department in the university. So they place them and bring them back and actually interconnect so that these things get fed into the courses.
They're a role model.
Yeah.
I mean, we all look to them.
Yeah. So more good ideas. Two more panelists to go before we actually start the conversation. So Daniel Klingenfeld, Head of Director Staff at Potsdam, Institute for Climate Impact Research. What's your barriers to stopping engaging policymakers?
So in my speech yesterday, I showed you that we need transformational change to stabilize the climate. This is clear. I mean, from all the scientific evidence we have, and the 1.5 report of the IPCC is giving ample evidence to this once again. The thing is that for transformational change, we need transformational policies. And policy making and policymakers do not have, let's say, I would say, not a tradition in transformational changes. There's a risk, at least seen oftentimes from the political decision makers, the people in charge, of proposing and advocating bold policies that would really turn the dial. And in my perception, and I think this is backed up by the scientific evidence, there is an erroneous perception between the risk of acting versus the risk of not acting. And clearly, I mean, if we do not act, the world will not stay the same. It will get worse and worse. And so this is the main barrier I would like to point to, that it seems to me that the risks of climatic changes, of damages, of extreme events, heat, drought, even located afar with knock-on effects to our countries, this is still perceived probably not in the full in their full magnitude. And so if it were, in my view, we would also see more courage in policy making. And finally, I think also from science we have got good evidence that transformational policies do not have to be disruptive to societies. They can actually be managed, and we can also think of, we talk about pricing, of compensating people most heavily, if consumers, citizens, most heavily affected by such policy changes. So we have good answers on how to actually make transformative policies work.
I like this, the point that if we have a changing baseline, and there's still, especially among the public, among policymakers, less so among business people, the idea that if we don't do anything, then everything will stay the same. Who was it? There's a famous quote, it's American, but I can't remember who said, if things are going to stay the same around here, we need to make some changes, right? So that's the position. And again, it's engaging policymakers around that concept. That,
it was an Italian.
Oh my gosh, was it an Italian?
It was Lampedusa.
Ah, Lampedusa, thank you. I'm so corrected, thank you. Well then thank you. Thank you, brilliant. And if I'd remembered that properly, I could have got better buck. Tell me again the quote.
For everything to stay the same, everything must change.
For everything to stay the same, everything must change. For everything to stay the same, everything must change. Thank you, sir. So I'm actually going to come to you in a moment to see what your reflections are on this before we start the conversation. So, but before I do, we have a final panelist, Bjorn Otto Sverdrup, SVP of Sustainability at Equinor. I've just about learned to call it Equinor and not Statoil now. We've actually heard a lot about how some of the policies and the policy implications would actually have implications for the oil and gas industry in particular. What do you think the barriers are to getting policymakers to act? And do you have any reflections about your own industry in that regard?
Thank you. There's a lot of smart things that have been said there, but I think there's one thing that should really worry us. And it's easy to forget when we hear this beautiful symposium from all parts of the world talking together. Because we're actually now seeing a very polarized world and much less cooperation. So the US has said it's not going to support the Paris Agreement. UK and European cooperation is under immense pressure with Brexit and also tensions among European states. US-Chinese relations are, I'm not going to say bottom low, but I mean fairly bad. Russia is there. In general, it's a tough time for international cooperation and thinking. And I think that should really worry us, because climate ultimately is a shared challenge. It is a call for unprecedented cooperation, both for leadership, but also to create the atmosphere of a willingness to regulate, and a willingness to introduce brave policy moves such as carbon pricing or what have you. So if there is one message to politicians, to me, is make sure that you invest in international cooperation and international institutions. And very few are actually doing that now. And I think I see great risks on that road.
So it'll be interesting, I mean, just a quick thought. What do you think it will take? Because international institutions are also under pressure, not just from lack of investment from policymakers, but also from breakdowns of trust as well, the perception that they're kind of big and unwieldy and bureaucratic, which is one of the reasons that my country is now in this mess. So
but Simon, you know, the professor from Yale talked about the importance of norms and how norms over time. And one way of looking at international regimes or institutions is to see them as a set of norms.
Yeah.
It could be the UN, it could be a global compact in a weak form. The Paris Agreement is a lot of norms. It's about expectations of, you know, expectations of bottom up. Nobody talks about it anymore, but WTO, World Trade Organization, is still very important and provide rules and expectations of fairness about trade and how that should be done. And I think if we stop talking about these norms, stop checking in on those norms, we are weakening those norms. So for now, I'm actually more optimistic about the dynamics in business than in politics. And ultimately, climate is also it's a very political thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've heard that already. I mean, several of the panelists have made this point that we can feel more confidence in the leadership that's being shown by business than the leadership that's being shown by policymakers. And then the question is, how do we get that leadership to engage? How do we get it to translate into more and better policy? Any quick reflections on that before we go to the audience?
I think one mistake we shouldn't make first is, I totally agree with the last comments. Let's look at reality, not only Trump, but look what happened in Paris. I mean, it was a CO2 carbon tax which initiated the social revolt of the Gilets jaunes. So, for me, a big mistake that we've all done, at least I did, is if you want to tackle climate change, you should never look at it as an isolated issue. There's a systematic change. It's not only climate, it's the digital revolutions, all the revolutions that were mentioned yesterday. It's impossible to tackle climate change without a bold social policy. It's impossible to tackle climate change without a bold job creation policy. So, for me, I've been working on climate change as an isolated platform for years. Wrong. We cannot do this anymore. And so we need, well, I don't know if we can educate politicians. I mean, for me, that's quite a difficult platform. So if we want, we were saying this before, if we want to educate politicians, we'll be very busy. So I think the issue here is don't take the climate change agenda away from a social justice agenda and away from a job creation agenda. And try and give solutions, as I was saying before, on the 4 levels, on identity, moral, and yes, final point, use artists, musicians, creatives. I really like the Bauhaus idea that was mentioned before. Use cultural institutions, use communication tools to make that complex agenda a cool agenda. Not only delivering results, but make it cool. And yes, I believe the young people are they are waiting, but let's not forget that there is a reaction against climate policies. There is a reaction, not only by Trump, but also by the people on the streets looking at how refusing a carbon tax and weakening the CO2, the Paris Agreement in Paris.
Sure. So we'll go to Connie and Hermann. Just a very quick comment about the Gilets jaunes. I was told that there was a group of radical environmental climate activists in Paris who also wanted to do a demonstration. And so we're talking to the leaders of the Gilets jaunes saying, why don't we join forces? And when you think about that, you say that's crazy. One is protesting against the diesel price, one is, but that shows that it's not really about the diesel price, it's about the government.
Social injustice, but it's about social
exactly.
injustice.
Exactly.
You need to have social policies together.
Exactly. Connie?
Yes, but obviously I agree with that. The reason why we, during the crisis years 2012, 13, 14 in the European Union, could have adopted new 2030 climate and energy targets, ambitious for the time, that was because it was the job opportunities, the new potential, the new opportunities. It was sold, and proven as something that could create jobs. So that is very, very important, obviously. However, I think we should be so careful how we interpret what is happening in France. Yeah. Because it is not so that if you ask those protesting there every Saturday, and now also on Monday, I understand, are you against climate politics? They would say no, most of them. That was, in a way, a coincidence that it was the diesel thing. It came on top of 100 other things. And for instance, if President Macron had done what he then did later, had shown that this diesel tariff that was slightly increased, that was going for a purpose that people could see the meaning of, and was sort of, yes, you have to have this holistic thing. But that would just say one point to what Björn said on the international cooperation, because it's true that there's a lot of skepticism there, and fear also on the globalization and all this. I just think we should not be mistaken. The skepticism there is not just aimed at policymakers and politicians. It's also big business. It's also the big banks, and I think it's important to understand that it is establishment as such that is being criticized. But then the interesting thing is, yes, we have Trump, and that's sort of a chapter on its own. I'm not going into that right now. But if you look at Europe, isn't it interesting that in light of Brexit, it seems when you look at the Eurobarometer, the polling, that in so many different member states, the acceptance of Europe is growing in light of what is happening with Brexit. And people can see what happened. It's easy to be against, but what do you want to have instead? And that's why I think that if you could find one area where people could see real added value in cooperating internationally, then it's what we're talking about today, sustainability and climate and things like that. And when you poll it, you can see that there is hardly any other issue where you would have such a big percentage of the European populations in favor of European cooperation as in the climate field. And that is why I think this should be part of the new narrative for Europe up to a European Parliament election and a new Commission, because here you have the potential of creating a new positive narrative, creating jobs, creating opportunities, creating future competitiveness, and focusing on innovation that Europe needs very much. So I think there's something here, and if we could sort of help to push that forward, I think that would be a good thing.
I absolutely love this, and one bit of it made me want to cry. So my two comments are that, first of all, we've been talking about how we need to strengthen international institutions so that they can deal with climate change. This is taking climate change as an issue, as a mechanism for strengthening international cooperation, and that narrative that so many people are behind, and I absolutely love that. The reason I wanted to cry is that I'd like to say you're welcome to the rest of Europe, that we've made leaving the European Union look so horrible that nobody else now wants to do it, but it still doesn't cheer me up. Okay, so Hermann, you wanted to say something, and then...
Yeah, I very much liked your intervention here. So I think that social sustainability needs to be included in any carbon pricing scheme. Let me look at carbon pricing. I would like to ask the audience, what is the price of carbon today?
In where? Where?
Yeah, here starts the problem. So please say something.
Where, in Europe, in Canada?
Connie said 23. Who bids? Who gives more than 23? 26?
It's 100 in Sweden, and it's like $2 in northeastern America.
100 in Sweden and $2 in northeastern America. Okay, thank you very much. I give you another number. You know what an OEM car manufacturer has to pay in 2021 to avoid 1 ton of carbon? 475 euros per ton. Okay? Mineral oil companies pay something in between 475 and 20. So what we have is, I would say, an inefficient market. The same product costs in one market 20 and in the other market 475. If you look at the maillot jaune, the gilets jaunes, they are protesting against, also, among other things, against an increase of a tax on diesel. In fact, this tax is nonsense. I'm sorry to say that, because the costs of electrification are, Ralf, correct me, even above 500 euro per ton. So a transformational change costs much more than a change where you simply substitute one thing by the other in an existing system. Substituting coal by gas, what would you say, Daniel? What's the cost of substituting lignite in Germany by natural gas-fired power plants?
Hermann, I was being very attentive what you presented yesterday, and I recall it was 45 euro per ton.
Thank you very much. So, and I also tell you that 150 megatons are emitted by lignite-fired coal power plants. We are talking not at all about coal here. Why not? Because it's not sexy. It's sexy to talk about electric cars. It is sexy and it's good to have electric cars, but it's not a good idea to forget about the big chunk of the problem, of course, which is coal. So we need a carbon price that reflects the real costs of carbon. So maybe it's not 20 euro, for sure it's not 20, it's much above 20, but also it's maybe not 500 now. And if we had this price, the market would care, we could unleash the powers of the market. And one last thing, of course, you have to take out all subsidies of fossil if you want to change it. If you start with leaving them in, then of course nothing will change. Thank you very much.
Björn.
I think it's popular to bash the British nowadays, but I think actually they need some celebration when it comes to this, because they have done something very remarkable about reducing their own use of coal. So actually CO2 emissions in the UK are now at the level of Queen Victoria. So they've been able to drive coal fully out by the increased use of natural gas, some carbon pricing, and also by efficiently developing offshore wind mainly. And I think it's remarkable. They've been able to do that with quite limited numbers of subsidies. Whereas in Germany, you have had the Energiewende, you haven't really been able to move the needle. So I think, again, to me, it's we need to have policies interested in results, outcomes, and also look across countries. Because just this is for us then on Equinor, you know, we are delivering a lot of natural gas to both. So we're going to make Germany available to, or possible to get rid of their coal, and also helping UK to get rid of its coal. But if you look at it in a pure Norwegian lens, we are representing a big number of the CO2 emissions in Norway. But of course, those emissions are happening because we are enabling UK to get rid of a much bigger number. So again, this is why it's so important to have an international perspective on things, and to spend time together trying to say, okay, this is what a consistent climate policy look like.
Sure. So policy measured on results, and thank you for giving me something to cheer me up there, about Britain. We've got two more comments from the panel here, and then we've got three in the audience. So quickly now, so Daniel and then Gustav. Daniel? Alexander, sorry.
You know, as we heard, I mean, social justice is as important as many other things. I think that's why I'm in love of the SDGs, because I think they are balancing all the requirements that we need to fulfill if we want to have a peaceful and happy future. And I think it would be much more appropriate to use and to develop a technology like they did with Arabesque, for example, to monitor the performance of the economy based on the SDGs and making the result as to a basis to adjust the VAT that we put on top of all the products. Because, for example, if you have a value chain that was explained by Mr. Pfitzner, where they not only focus on the CO2, but mainly also on gender equality, but maybe also on social justice, whatever. And in the end, the new car has a 10% price advantage because of a lower VAT on the shop, then you have the right signal to the markets. I think this is pretty important. In Germany, nobody wants to hear this idea, but because VAT, everything is so complicated. I think that's good. The better the companies are reporting according to a new system, the better should be their chance to lower their price at the shop, you know, because this is what makes the people, what makes the consumer able to decide. If you have an ecologic bread and it's 10% cheaper simply because of the difference in VAT, the production cost is playing not any role. I mean, this would be a big leverage on the decision making.
So that comes back to what both of you were talking about as well, the reporting and also how to incorporate that in the policy. We had a couple of in the audience, but do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a reaction I had, so maybe it's a little outdated now, but I've heard it yesterday. I've heard it here. It's a little. As I said before, I'm not a policymaker, but I would actually like to defend policymakers. So you hear that business are leading and policymakers are not. But so I come from Sweden, the land of the $100 carbon tax, which is nominally true. So every time there's this measure to when it was during the 90s or today with environmental policies, the Confederate of Swedish Enterprises that organized the big business in Sweden, they come out with their big guns and they say this is bad, this is not good. I mean, that is a reality of policymakers that then they have to answer up to. I have colleagues then, not at my department, but then they write reports that maybe get some funds from this Confederate Swedish Enterprise. They write a report that this is not a good policy. And then the policymakers are kind of tied up in this. I'm just saying it has to be a very hard profession. It's an obvious barrier.
What's the solution?
I think, well, transparency would be better. But no, I don't know what the solution is, to be fair. Okay. It's an obvious barrier. I think acknowledging it is an important step. It's
like a mire. So thank you. So we have some people, comments in the audience, first of all here, and then over there. Maybe, do we have a microphone? Or?
I have the microphone,
okay,
so I will start, because I have the microphone.
Possession being 9/10 of the law, right?
I have three comments. The first is on just a broad comment on, we said, do we need to teach the politicians? I'm pretty sure the politicians know exactly what the problem is, but they respond to voters. So really, you have to teach the voters. And that's problematic, and it takes time, and which we don't have, which is another problem. My two more specific points, one on Britain, and it's very creditable that Britain, burns less coal today than it does, than it did during the times of Queen Victoria, but that's largely because it buys manufacturers from China, which burns a lot more coal than Britain did at the times of Queen Victoria. I think too few people talk about the embedded carbon in the West, feel very pleased with ourselves in the West, that we're reducing our carbon emissions, but actually we've just exported, like much else, we've exported and offshored our carbon emissions to the developing world. So we really should be thinking about it, and actually thinking about the WTO and trade and border adjustments and all that is something that should really come to the fore. So that's one specific intervention. My other point is a broad point about the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think are a terrible idea. And the reason I think Sustainable Development Goals are a terrible idea is that there are 169 of them. Most of them are fuzzy and meaningless, and they leave people, companies, countries, they allow them to cherry pick the ones that they seemingly are doing something on, just by looking at their operations. I'm sure that in my ordinary life, I can pick a few dozen sustainable development goals which I meet, without ever trying to meet any sustainability goals?
Okay, so I think 3 really excellent points, and particularly the one about embedded emissions. In the spirit of this panel, we're not supposed to be talking about someone should do something. We're supposed to be talking about what we actually do about it. So I'm going to come back to the panel on that as well. But there's just 2 more comments in the audience. And do you want to comment first on? Okay.
Yeah, so my point was going to be that I agree very strongly with the need for a meaningful carbon price. But I don't think the problem is that the business community hasn't made it clear that many of us at least support the idea of a carbon price. BP has been arguing for it for decades. Just before Paris, 6 CEOs of the world's leading oil and gas companies, including Equinor and Total, Shell and others, wrote an open letter to Christiana Figueres saying we need a carbon price. It was published as a headline in the Financial Times on the day it was published. The CPLC exists and has many companies that support a carbon price. The message has come loud and clear. The reason I think it hasn't been received is political. It's that policymakers are unwilling to make transparent a cost of dealing with climate change because they won't get elected, because consumers don't understand the need for it, and tax is a dirty word. So given that we don't have time to educate consumers to accept a tax on carbon, an alternative is to re-communicate the way in which the policy is structured. And there is an initiative in the US called the Climate Leadership Council. It's bipartisan, it's advocating for a carbon tax, but it's not calling it a carbon tax. It's calling it a citizen dividend. It's turning a negative into a positive by saying that it's not that we'll tax you, it's that we will give every single American citizen a share of the revenue from the tax in the form of a per capita dividend, in this case, I think of $2,000 per person per year. So it's kind of reorienting the terms of the communication of the policy. Yeah. And it hasn't yet succeeded, but it has the most likelihood of succeeding politically, I think, of any policy frame that I have seen.
It's a brilliant idea, and there's so many people who have been talking about it, and what I sort of want to understand is, what could it take to tip that over the edge? How could we or the people that we know catalyze that to try and take that idea and make it stick? It's a general, you don't have to answer everything, but I think that's a way to think about it, because it's genius. You get a check in the post that says this is your contribution. It's absolutely fantastic, but still doesn't seem to.
No, it's not the most economically efficient way of redistributing, but it's very, very simple to communicate.
The narrative is
and
very,
it means you get a check in the post.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more progressive than an offsetting tax cut. Economic analysis actually showed that it's, in that sense at least, it's certainly less regressive than a tax cut would be.
Sure. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I would probably try to come back to the topic of this panel, engagement of policymakers, and remind you about developing countries. In December, I attended COP24 in Poland, and I realized that some countries have difficulties even to calculate nationally determined contributions. I mean, they don't have enough scientists, they don't have enough skills, they don't have enough equipment to do it. So we are here, we have a luxury of discussing 100 in Sweden, okay, is not enough, we need 400, but in terms of engaging policymakers, we need to engage policymakers in developing countries, and to do this, we need to educate them. We need to help them to understand the threats and risks and opportunities and give them some tools. And in some cases, it's relatively easy to do. In some cases, it's difficult. So I would, encourage you to think about some education for developing country policymakers.
So a potential enabler there, which is capacity building for NDC determinations. Björn Otter?
I just enjoyed listening to these very important viewpoints. So thank you. I couldn't agree more with this, international dimensions of patterns of emission And also if you zoom in and start looking, even a footprint of a salmon exported to Japan is going to shock you. Or a T-shirt produced in beautiful Milano. You know, so I think it goes to the fundamental transition of life and the way we live our lives that needs to happen. But yes, everything looks complicated and are interconnected, but there are still some very impactful, easy, available solutions. And we shouldn't forget those. Get rid of coal, eliminate flaring, minimize aviation. You know, plenty of things that can easily be done.
Okay, Daniel?
Yeah, just a reaction to the comments. Yes, thank you. Indeed, I think what's important is to think in systems. And I share what you just said. I mean, in Europe, we sometimes we are at risk of just looking more or less at ourselves and looking at carbon footprints just in a national or even just a European territorial way, and that's not enough. We all know that it's a global problem. It doesn't matter where emissions get released into the atmosphere, the impacts will be felt around the world. So clearly, in order to be successful, we need to move others, we need to convince others, and there is a suggestion. I think also we need to think about incentives. And when talking about policy making, the possibilities for international cooperation, you know that international climate finance is a big topic, and we've tried many things in the past, among them, for example, clean development mechanism with certain downsides which we have identified. And I would like to actually put forward one suggestion that has been made, that is to help developing countries implement policies such as carbon pricing and actually reward them for that through payments from the Green Climate Fund, for example. So not go project by project on a small scale, because actually, again, if we look at the data and the transformation pathway, we cannot afford that just some, like European or other, say, richer countries are moving, but more or less we need to try at least to have everyone move in lockstep and to enable that leapfrogging also in other countries where the energy system has not been built out the way it has been built out here. Sure. So I think systems thinking is really crucial, and it's Alex's point, systems thinking in a more regional way, where you have experiments going on, but also systems thinking in a more global way. And I think there are clever solutions to change incentives, and I would also very much like to second Paul Jeffrey's point from BP of also taking the citizens' perspective and also talking about the benefits of carbon policies. It's also a communications question and challenge, and I think we can all do better on this still.
Sure, and we will be coming to both finance and citizens later. Connie? Yeah.
Just two points. First, on the WTO. It goes without saying that in modern trade agreement, I mean, if we did them in the right manner, it could be extremely instrumental. But that's a very big if, because I'm sorry, but it's just not going to happen under the present circumstances. And I mean, one of the red lines that Europe had defined in the TTIP negotiations with the former Obama administration, that was very much on the climate and environmental side. It could not happen if not the climate and environmental issues were being respected, and if we could use that to give some leverage to what's going on between the two regions. But I mean, under these circumstances, WTO is not going to I mean, Trump is even threatening to leave the WTO. So, I mean, it's not going to happen. And another one, sorry to be the one to sort of spoil the good atmosphere of all these things that can be done, because I agree 100% with what is being said about carbon pricing, but I've also tried to be on the other side of the table. And it's true that there are big companies saying, we want a global price on carbon. And they write letters about that, and they advocate it, it's fine. But we all know there is no way that anytime soon we will have a global price on carbon. We can have a European price, and we can have 20 American states doing their thing, and a lot of different systems. But then when you say, no, but you cannot have it global now, something is happening in China, it's very good, but not global. Then you see a lot of the big businesses saying, yes, but we meant global. It had to be a global price. And then when we talk about redistributing the revenues, I mean, what have we seen in the EU? The companies think that the revenues from the carbon pricing must go back to the companies. You can argue very well for that, saying that is for the innovation and that goes to the good guys and everybody pays, and those who are doing things, they will have revenues. But just to say that it sounds so good, but I always thought that when people say we are all for it, we want a global carbon price, you have not really helped policymakers to solve the problem, because there's no way that you will get a carbon price sort of in one take going global, but you can build a patchwork, and then 10, 15, 20 years from now, hopefully it could grow into a global carbon price.
And certainly in a lot of the conversations I've had with NGOs who have criticized that, they've said you're only doing it because you know you're not going to get it. And so, you know, it hasn't necessarily helped with the trust issue. We'll come back to Paul, but there's Jerome, and then with us, Paul. So Jerome, there's a microphone just behind you. Just behind you, microphone.
Thank you. I just would like to add on Connie's point, and I could not agree more than what you said, Connie, which is, and reflecting on the point Paul made about the call on carbon price by several energy companies in Europe a few years ago, we made the point very, very clear at that time that we could not and we should not talk about a global carbon price. And because those who talk about a global carbon price basically are fighting against a carbon price because it is an utopia. And the point we made at the time was that we should make sure that we have carbon prices, as many carbon prices or as many carbon signals as possible. And that, to the point made as well earlier, they should be, to all extent possible, structured as incentives and not structured as penalties, because humankind prefers incentives than penalties, just in the way things are framed. And these 2 points are very important. They are semantics, but not only semantics, they are as well systemic. We must all talk about carbon prices and about incentives. Okay. And the more we will do that, the more we will bring, I would say, our piece to the edifice, to the foundation. I think the two important points. And maybe one more I would like to add as well on a point that was made earlier about education, and I cannot agree more on that too, which is we must all realize that the young generation and bright people want to work now on a low carbon economy, on a low carbon society. And global energy companies know that. They can see that bright people want to work on creating a low carbon society. And therefore, big corporates will change. And they may not change because they believe in it. They may not change because they have the financial incentives to do it, but they will change because if they don't change, bright people will not come and work with them. So I'm sharing a positive point here, which is things will change because the young generation want a low carbon society and therefore want to work for a positive cause contributing to a low carbon society, and therefore we must create as many carbon management universities as possible everywhere and transform our universities into low carbon management universities.
Absolutely. Low carbon management universities. I think that deserves a round of applause. And the microphone over here, please.
So I think I'm the young generation here, and I'm a student, and actually I think I'm the consumer, because most of you are policymakers, or maybe you're business women or men, and so here I might be the consumer. And as a consumer, I might say that I decide not to be a consumer. The only barrier I see to climate mitigation is to renounce to privileges. So renouncing to take planes, renouncing to eat meat, renouncing to buy new clothes. And this is the only barrier that I see, but I'm not taking just, like my friends don't renounce to go to the McDonald's, okay. Yeah. So but other people might renounce to take planes. I take a plane maybe one every 5 years, but I renounce to do that because we can't take planes anymore. Yeah. And actually, you know, like 2/3 of the people around the world don't have, you know, not even they're dying in the Mediterranean, and we fly with planes like every day. We should renounce it, and that's the only barrier, renouncing to privileges. And actually, consumers might be more aware than this, decide not to be consumers.
So this is a really interesting point about what we renounce and what sacrifices we make. And we're going to come back to that this afternoon as well, as you know. One comment I would make about that is that in my long and painful experience of working on the climate change issue, I've realized that the narrative that says the only way to deal with climate change is to give things up does not work. It doesn't work. We've really tried it, it doesn't work. And that's why this is about, I love the point that Jerome made as well in the context of that, about what incentives. It doesn't just have to be pulling back, it's also what positive things we can do.
That's why you're all here, and I'm very happy that you're all here to discuss with me, and very happy to that. Yeah. But I still, it's a really important voice. It's an important point.
It is an important voice, and fast trains, yes. Yeah. Connie, I just wanted to say, sorry, can I, and we'll come to the education. It's just that when we were talking last night, you talked particularly about incentives. It's just to pull this back to how we're engaging policymakers. And we will be talking about all these other things as we go along. But how do you build incentives within the closed doors, the rooms of policymakers, so that then this becomes something that you actually want to reach for? For example, you started off by saying finance departments need to price this in. So how do you build an incentive within the policy-making structure that will make policymakers want to reach for it?
Well, one of the things is that the electorate starts to call for it and prioritize it, and the business also call for it, because that matters. And it matters if there is a feeling in the offices in a government that people only are preoccupied with the short-term needs, then that's what they deliver. So if there really is this push, as I think is coming now, it's also coming from the green student movements, and it's coming from many quarters, the thing that young people start to change their diets, things that for only 2 or 3 years ago, we would not have thought that could come as fast and as quick, and now through social media, people change habits just like this. And I think that sent strong messages. And I think that, just to take an example from my own country, Denmark, for some years, the leading parties, be the Social Democrats or the leading Liberal Party now, the two governing parties, they didn't speak too much about climate. And then suddenly last spring, both candidates for the Prime Minister's office suddenly, bursted out with climate and green here and there and everywhere, and advertising everywhere. Why was that? I'm absolutely sure it was because they could see in some polling that even in a relative progressive country when it comes to these issues, people are not happy if the policymakers are not seen as being seriously enough pursuing the next steps. And that is why that has sort of slightly changed, so that now we are talking about in Denmark, we are having elections within the next few months, that climate change could be #1 priority. And that is because of a lot of civil society and a lot of business starting to realize, wow, we are neglecting this. We need to take the next difficult steps, and we expect it from you, the policymakers. So that could be one very strong incentive.
Sure. And we heard a lot yesterday about the climate change narrative and how powerful that can be, not just as something that's frightening, but also something that gives hope and inspiration. And I think that's going to be an important part of the answer, right?
But sorry, can I add just very, very brief, one more thing. I think that often business people and industry organizations, they go to the climate minister or the environment minister with their sort of, this is what you need to do. But I think now we're talking about the specific how-to. When you meet the finance ministers, the economic ministers, that is also where the environmental issues should be part of what you present, because they need to hear it instead of it's parked over there with the green ministers.
This is a hugely important point, and I think we need to make sure that we register this. If you think about the difference in businesses, all of the difference in the world happened when it stopped being something that went into a CSR report and started being something that was at the heart of business strategy, right? When it becomes, when your CFO is talking about it, then you're in a different place from when it's just sustainability. And the same point for government as well. But let me Daniel's been very patient, so let me just go to him and then we can come to you, Giovanna.
Just to echo to echo this last point, indeed, I mean, climate policy is at the heart of economic policy, and it touches more or less all corners of society. So we can just only re-emphasize this, and it's certainly well above the simple sphere of ecology. My actually reaction to the intervention of you is, well, thank you very much for pointing this out, and it brings me back to what we can also expect and should not expect from policymakers. We cannot just expect from policymakers to solve everything for us. It's completely impossible. And behavioral change, and that's what you alluded to, will have to be a huge part of the solution. We heard from Connie Hedegaard how attitudes, how norms are changing. I consider myself still part of the younger generation, but not the very young. I mean, those now, this Fridays for Future, they've come to the Coal Commission, I'd mentioned yesterday, and they gave a petition. And so I really feel this energy, this activism, the values that are changing, the demands of young people. Jerome mentioned this for Total and other companies to attract talent. So there's really something moving, and I see this as a very, very positive development. And it must be a combination of behavioral change, but I may be a bit less pessimistic than what I heard from you. We also have good technologies, good alternatives that will help us make the transition without renouncing to mobility, for example, because also personally, I can just say it really from my study times, I see such a big value in global exchange and in also physically meeting other people, being able to be mobile also around the world. And we have, of course, to work on this. And I see some potential really for renewable fuels, for example, to help us still remain mobile. But behavioral change is still a very, very crucial point.
Hugely important. And remember, one of our tasks is, as articulated this morning, is to give young people hope, because you are the ones that are going to have to handle this mess. So thanks very much for bringing that up. I just wanted, Paul, did you want to reflect on some of the things that you'd heard? Is a microphone up here? And then I'm going to just warn the panel, I'm going to come back to you, because I'm not going to try and summarize now, I'll be doing it later today, but I am going to warn you, there's been a lot of richness here. I'm going to go to each of you in turn and say one thing, one dream, if you could make it happen, what would it be? And then we can think about how to make it happen. So, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to respond to Connie's point about global carbon price, but Jerome made that point.
Okay.
I agree with you, but not all companies are making that point. So the additional point I wanted to make actually was to pick up on the life cycle assessment point. I think most people have suggested in the room that they support the idea, it's a good way of thinking, and we would support that. But I would introduce a distinction between using it as a basis for policy making, where I think it's a good thing, where you can identify value chains that perform well and perform badly at a high level, and you can direct policy to support the good value chains and penalize the bad value chains. But it's a ferociously complicated exercise to do it well, and particularly for certain kinds of value chains, and particularly value chains that involve land use. And for that reason, if its use is extended to become the basis for numerical regulation within value chains, I think it can become problematic, because it can create the sense of sort of accuracy by precision. And it's false accuracy. You're getting a precise number, but it may not be giving you the right answer. So I would just caution about the use of life cycle assessment for numerical regulation. And just one example, in the biofuels value chain, indirect land use is a real phenomenon, but trying to quantify it is next to impossible. And so by attributing numerical values, I think you risk penalizing the wrong value chains and penalizing getting it backwards.
Getting the wrong answer.
Yeah.
And I think LCA's life cycle analysis is going to be one of the things that I think we should bring as a recommendation out of this, and how to really do it properly. Alexander, well, actually, both of you, do you want to make a quick comment? And then we'll go to Ralf. Yeah, okay.
I would like to come back also to the student that mentioned the importance of consumers.
Yeah.
If you look at it, the whole problem from a systemic point of view, it all starts with the consumer. You're completely right. So if you are a consumer and you want to fly green, okay, let's assume. Sorry?
She goes by train.
Yeah. I also normally go by train, I can tell you, but if you have, sometimes you have to fly. Some of us had to fly. If not, we would not be here. So, but it would be great if you had an airline that provides you with renewable fuel. At the moment, there's only compensation things in Lufthansa and so on, but not a renewable fuel. But let's stay with another product. Let's assume you have a mobile phone. Everybody has a mobile phone. Who has a fair phone? No one. Thank you. I don't have a fair phone because I have to say Audi does not provide fair phones to, to his people. So there's a problem involved with fair phones in quality and stuff. But if there is nothing available as a consumer, you simply buy the bad thing. Let me come to the end. So the chain goes down from consumer to producer. And Alcantara is a very good example how to make it. They make money with being sustainable. So it's not only a penalty, it's good to be sustainable, and you sell, you have even maybe more profit because you are sustainable. And then you go down to the supplier, and now we are at the carbon export that was mentioned in the second row here. We can prevent carbon export if we have a supplier that enforces the supplier in China to be green. Automatically, there will be a push to more green in China. So the LCA and the systemic view includes the customer, the supplier, and the producer.
Yeah, which is why I think life cycle analysis is going to be a very important part of the answer. Alex?
I really think we need to do two things. Number one, if the house is burning, I think it's better to learn how to stop the fire in one room than to keep on talking years for years that the house is burning. So I think we should really focus on smaller regions, and then we should create examples that the others can copy, because we are very good in copying. It's very hard to. I mean, when we started with the PV sector, I mean, the size of a PV system was a few kilowatts. Then we worked 4 years on getting the first bank-financed 100 kilowatt system. It was a hard. 3 years later, you could finance PV systems in Germany like buying a car. It was easy because the bankers simply copied the papers of the first guys who did that. Then he said, yes, you can do 100 kilowatt, but you cannot do double-digit megawatt. Then we built the first double-digit megawatt power plant. Now, with my friends, we are building, it's exactly the same people. We are building the first 2 gigawatt PV power plant in Egypt, because everybody said, yeah, you can build a few hundred megawatt, but you cannot replace it. So you need people give the chance to show what's possible, and then all the others will copy.
Yeah,
that's a mechanism that we need to trigger.
I love that. We're going to come back to that later. I want quickly to go to Ralf. Can we get a microphone up here? When I come to each of you for what the final thing is going to be, it's going to have to be very short. We're running out of time, but we've got some very good ideas here. Ralf?
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the Gilets jaunes discussion, which we had earlier, because there is something inside we have to have in mind whenever talking about carbon pricing, life cycle assessment approaches, and so forth. We have to do it right in terms of communication. And what happened in France, I mean, the initial was, let's say, the ignition point was the raising taxes for diesel. And where Mr. Macron failed was in communicating that this increase will be given back in a different way to the people. So we always have to tell the full story of this transition and of this transformational change. Otherwise, we might risk, with all other good approaches on carbon pricing, that we get more gilets jaunes. So this is my point. We have to be very careful and thought through the entire process when changing these things, because the reason behind is that there is, from the macroeconomic point, we fully agree carbon pricing is the right thing to be done, because the social cost of carbon is much higher than the current ETS price and so forth. However, on the micro level, there might be distributional aspects which might create some losers and some winners. And we have to be mindful in how to, let's say, minimize the number of losers and have the winners that convince us in supporting that transformation.
Sure. So that's, I think that's a really good point about it's almost like the life cycle analysis attitude, not just to policy, but also how to communicate it. We're running out of time on this panel. We're going to come back to all of these topics. I'm going to go very quickly to each panelist in turn and say, give me one thing as a reflection that you would like to see happen.
Well, one sentence which connects to what has just been said. Low-cost airplanes are now one of the increasing sources of CO2. And if I tell my 20 years old daughter not to take a low-cost airplane, she would say, well, what should I do? So, communication, we should stop saying, don't fly, don't eat, don't live. We need to sort of reverse that, move differently, eat differently. But there's a huge communication issue here. And there's a huge communication platform around the complexity and full story. And for me, I said that yesterday, it's essential, it's crucial to just step out of this room and not just look at the climate issue alone. It's a social, it's a distributional, it's a transition issue. So it's not just a decarbonization issue. It's an inequality issue, it's a social issue, and we have to look at it creatively all together.
Brilliant, thank you. Connie?
Very briefly, I think I have made my point on pricing and incentives. I think it is absolutely key. I agree very much to create positive solutions, a positive vision that is key to make people do something differently tomorrow from what they used to do yesterday. And then just a final point, somehow reinstall the acceptance of smart and clever regulation. Mr. Pengg mentioned in the beginning the material issue. Can you remember when we had the new EU Commission abolishing first the circular economy piece? Because that was red tape, that was bureaucracy. Where did that come from? It came from industry. Said, what are we going to do with that? Get rid of that. It's red tape. Now then they had to reinstall it because a lot of people said, no, this is smart regulation. This is helping us to innovate. But I think we have had a very sort of liberalistic paradigm as if all sorts of regulation was of the negative. And I think that we have, when we talk about cooperation, it also includes to accept and work together on smart regulation.
Sure. So that's a good challenge for the next panel. Hermann?
Yeah, I think there's something good about that the whole thing is a complex system. We don't have to have a global solution at once, but everybody can start where he's standing. Let's say Andrea. His consciousness is focused on doing something good. It's not only on money, he needs to focus on money too. But his main consciousness is focused on doing good. So the consciousness is very important. If you are a decision taker, if you have money, and if you are conscious of the problem, then you will look for solutions and you will find solutions. So start where you are, this is important. And whether you are leading a company or you are a student, you can influence your environment. Either you make very big decisions or smaller decisions, but you start to influence. And if you influence more and more people. Sure. And then if you are a state, maybe you start with a state. In Germany, for example, there's no... Sure. Yeah, okay. But in Germany, there's a region that started to do... it's like an experimental region where they have introduced new technologies that would not be introduced in whole Germany because the law would not allow it because... tax exemption. So they have a region. So you start with a region, if you don't have it at state level. If you don't have it at EU level,
got it.
Okay.
Okay, Alex.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it is very good to think about winners and losers. But the better is the good enemy. And if we went better, the good is the loser. That's simply the case. And that's also my view on this fossil age that we have to leave. I mean, and the second thing is, if you want to build a new great house, you will ask a great architect and not the guy who's delivering the piping. And what our politicians are doing when they are thinking about how to design a new energy system, they are asking all the people with the wires, with the turbines, with all this old shit. I mean, if you want to invent a new world, you have to ask creative people, thinking, giving them a probe of their work, and then roll it out. This is, I think, how you do it. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, my point I would like to make, you said what we would like to pass on, a little more like maybe a dream, or so we have a system that is fairly robust. We have a market system, and what boils down to it enables decentralized decision making based on price signals. And obviously then pricing is key. And I agree with the fact that a global carbon tax is probably utopian. However, what I would really like to dream of is thinking about on the other side, about the fossil fuel subsidies, which are both bad economics and immoral, and they should go.
Okay, thanks. Daniel.
We all have a big responsibility in communicating to policymakers that the risk for transformational policies has gone down significantly over the past years. From all the areas we operate in, we've got better technologies, we've got cheaper alternatives, and we've got public opinion and youth movements that are changing our societies, already changing. So the situation is way different than just 5 years ago. And even just 1 year ago, I heard interventions of some colleagues who had been here also last year, and the tone even this year is different. So the world is already changing, and the opportunities for transformational policies keep on increasing, whereas the risk on the climate side doesn't go away and will ever get bigger. So from the science side, we keep on communicating this, and we will do so, but we all have a role to encourage policymakers that it is high time to take action.
And again, a very important point. I think I've heard this a few times now, that the balance is shifting. The risk of acting is becoming less than the risk of not acting. And that's a message that I think's made it into business and hasn't necessarily made it so much into policy. Giovanna.
Leadership. I think it's all about leadership. And for policymakers, I think that particularly would mean carbon prices in as many sectors as possible, which are also taking account of the needs of the poor.
Brilliant, thank you very much. You did that very, very tightly, thank you, we are on time. That was so rich, and thank you for putting so much energy and vision and brilliant ideas into that. We did manage to get to some concrete things. I will be summarizing them later. But for now, thanks very much to our panel members. That was great.